In light of recent tragedies, I want to share a couple of tips from the survival world that you can use even while out on a boat to kind of help you out in an emergency situation. Some important stuff, so if you spend time on the water, stay tuned. Hey guys, Joel here from American Survival Co. and this is going to be a quick kind of impromptu video. In light of recent tragedy, there's 2 firefighters that are lost at sea, and obviously that is a horrible thing to have happen. You know, there's families involved, and it's just a very traumatic event for the families, and just some tips I wanted to share with everybody. Actually, First Coast News came out and had asked me some things, and I don't know what they're actually going to use and edit and do, so I think this is really good information to put out there, so hopefully you'll get something out of this. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about emergency, technology. It's out there. A lot of people don't know about it, and part of this experience and advice comes from my past life as a Navy EOD tech. We spent a lot of time on boats, and every time we were out on a boat, it was equipped with an E.P.I.R.B. If you don't know what that is, and you are out on a boat, you should know about that. It's essentially a black box for a boat. A lot of them are water activated, and if the boat were to sink or be exposed to the water, it sends out a signal, and it's basically an automatic reach back for help. There's a lot of different ones on the market. Typically they're anywhere from $500 to over $1,000, so it's not exactly common man type stuff, but if you have the means to have a nice boat that can make it offshore, you should be able to afford one of those, and it is stupid not to have one. Many of them have to be registered, and they come with a monthly fee because you're kind of, using satellites and things like that, but you got to make sure you understand how to use it if you're going to employ it. Some of them have to be triggered, which obviously I don't care for as much, because if you've ever been in a close call out on the water, a lot of times you don't have time for that, which brings me to another point. Understand how to make a mayday call. I don't know how many times I've been out on boats, and it's, I'm not the safety police, but nobody outranks safety. If you have a VHF radio, you're supposed to have it on channel 16, and you're supposed to be monitoring that net. It's kind of the whole purpose of it, because whether you have the finest fishing vessel in the fleet, or you're, kind of piecemealing things together and just trying to catch some fish, it's important to have some kind of reach back, because when you're 20 miles offshore, you're tempting fate, so to speak. Even on a quality vessel, it's such a tight line, anything can go wrong. Just to illustrate that, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Many of you who've come out for classes, you've heard stories about my teammate Faglips. At least that's what we call him. It's not his real name. Well, I was on the phone with him yesterday. We were talking about, these firefighters lost at sea, and he was telling me about one of his OICs that had a very close call and now carries a P.l.b. with him anytime he's on the water, which is a personal locator beacon. And a lot of these things are even now more affordable than they ever have been before, and the technology has been upgraded. It's very worth looking into, and they're not just for the open seas. Even if you hike in remote areas, it's a smart thing to have on you. A P.l.b. So many different things out there on the market. Put some research into it. If you're somebody that spends a lot of time, especially alone in remote areas, it's worth looking into. Very affordable nowadays, and there's so many different options out there. But so back to the story. One of Faglips' buddies, and this is another EOD guy who spent a lot of time on the water, experienced boatman, and a lot of times we're offshore diving and training and doing all kinds of other things. Well, this was a Hobby Lobby fishing trip that they had went on, and they were about 30 miles off the coast of Destin, Florida, where EOD school's at. They pretty much just set up. They're putting a chum slick in the water, and before they know it, about 3 inches of water's on the boat deck. By the time they made their mayday call, the boat had already capsized. They didn't even know if somebody had heard it. Now, if they basically just blew off this whole kind of emergency procedure protocol thing, they would have never have been able to get that information out timely enough for somebody to hear it. And think about, floating there in the water and not knowing if somebody's heard you or not. Luckily, somebody did, and they were only in the water for about 30 minutes. And it wasn't the Coast Guard or anybody like that. It was another fishing vessel that came to the rescue. Just for the general safety of all the boaters on the water, it's important to have a VHF radio and be able to understand how to use it and go through that protocol. So don't discount it or think like, oh, I'll never have to use that sort of thing. And I don't personally own a big boat that I take offshore, but anytime, even if I'm going on a charter, I'll refresh on these sort of things, because that's a worst case scenario, and you definitely want to know what you're doing. If you have 10 seconds to get that call for help out, you want to know what you're doing. So basically, when it comes to VHF radios too, you want basically the fanciest antenna you can afford. VHF is line of sight, and you might not be able to reach out that far. And there's also major upgrades in basically ICOM radios nowadays that they're completely waterproof and sealed. They have an emergency red button on them. It warrants looking into, because say we were on a vessel that capsized or sank, we at least have that call for help with us, and we can reach out pretty far. But it is line of sight, so it has its limitations, but make sure you understand those limitations. So to recap on the technology safety net, the E.P.I.R.Bs, the P.l.bs, and your VHF radio, you want to make sure you have stuff that's GPS connected. You want to get MMSI registered. I've read statistics from the Coast Guard that up to 85% of people that actually have this equipment haven't registered it, so it's useless. And if you do that, you're making it easier for our infrastructure to actually find you and pinpoint your location. And you got to keep in mind, it is very difficult to find somebody in the open ocean. Now, don't you want to make that easier for people that it's their jobs, they're professionals, they're good at it, and you can throw them a bone by making it easier for them and actually registering your advice, making sure it's linked up to your GPS, and a lot of them have internal GPSs too, where all you have to do is a little bit of research on whatever product you're using and make sure that happens. So my point here is that's important to do, so please do it. And I 1000% understand not everybody's going to be able to afford an E.P.I.R.B, and it's like monthly subscription type stuff, or P.l.b, but at the very least have a VHF radio and know how to use it and understand its limitations. It's also great to have a personal radio, because if the boat does sink, a lot of those VHF radios are tied into the electronics of the boat, and if it tips over under the water, it's going to do nothing for you. Whereas the handhelds, a lot of them are waterproof, and you at least still have a chance of reaching help. So that's something to consider. And I don't see a lot of people doing that, but it's if I was able to afford just a system like that, at a bare minimum, I'd have a VHF radio with a quality antenna and a handheld as well that was waterproof, that if my boat sank, I at least have some kind of reach out capabilities. Your cell phone is not the best option for a reach back when you're out in the open water. You got to be fairly close to shore for them to work all that great. You have to know somebody's number, so keep that in mind. If that's your only plan, you should save up, get yourself a VHF radio, and save up and get yourself a handheld VHF radio with the best antennas you can afford. As far as the E.P.I.R.Bs and the P.l.bs go, there's so many different things out there on the market, but whatever you can afford, anything is better than nothing. And just understand how to use it. If you have to register it, get a Marine Mobile Service Identification number. I believe that's what it's called. There's steps you have to do to make it easier for the Coast Guard and other rescue services to actually, be able to use this amazing technology that we have available to us. So make sure you look into that and understand that. That is the single best thing you can do to make yourself more findable. And just because you never completely put all your faith into technology, obviously it's smart and it helps and it's saved lots of people. Unlike being in the woods where we can gather resources and things like that, there's limited resources out on the open sea. And so I want to share with you a couple of tips that I think a prepared person, might enjoy and be able to employ in their lives. Now, the biggest thing that's going to get you out on the water is the water itself. It doesn't matter if we're talking about warm temperatures, like out here in Florida right now. It's August, it's hot. It's very strange to think about hypothermia right now, but if I'm wet for long enough, I can hype out even in these conditions. And I've seen it happen going through dive school and things like that, where we're in the water for extended periods of time in wetsuits. They're heated pools sometimes we're out in the ocean. But if you're in the water for 18 hours, you are going to get cold, because water is 25 times more efficient than air at transferring energy. And so unless you happen to be, on a sinking boat in 96-degree water, you have the possibility to hype out. So having something as simple as a space blanket, if we are lucky enough to just be dead in the water and still on a vessel, if I do get wet, it does rain, or I have to go in the water to spearfish or pull in a fish or something like that, I'm going to dry my clothes and I'll use my space blanket type material to warm back up. It's kind of thinking. Now here's one option you might consider. This is actually a tarp and a space blanket built into one, which, depending on your vessel, could be handy to create some sort of shade structure, because aside from exposure to the elements, the opposite is also going to be a worry, where we're just baking out in the sun and we're getting dehydrated. So those are your two biggest concerns. Notice I didn't mention food first. Well, we're out on the open ocean. We have a possibility of getting food. It is smart to have rations. So you want something that's not going to spoil, is going to keep for a long time, and is there, for emergencies. So another tip with this kind of tarp here, and one of the reasons I like it, is it's super high vis, right? Which is great. If people are trying to look for you, you want to make it easy for them. The other thing is this reflective material. If I'm stuck out in a boat, I'd have to improvise, but I'm going to put this up in a fashion where the reflective side is pointing towards the sun and is keeping me just a little bit cooler. And as mentioned before, in a situation where I'm cold and wet, as I'm drying up, my clothes and something like this, I'll be wrapped in this to, stay a little bit warmer. I'd want something like this. It's not like being lost in the woods where, we could make a primitive shelter on the water and this and that. I suppose you can, improvise some stuff with seaweed that you collect or anything like that if you're lucky enough. But this is going to go a long way to keep you comfortable. And we can use it in other applications too, like for fishing. I could cut a piece of this off if I'm not able to get bait, and just basically snell it to a hook, and I have a little fishing bait to hopefully feed myself. Speaking of feeding yourself, having some kind of food rations that don't spoil is always a wise idea. I'd say at bare minimum at least a day's worth of food. Now, common man tactic would be, a jar of peanut butter or something like that. They keep for a long time, they're super calorie dense, and it's there if you need it. Obviously we want to be able to fish, right? And if you're going out fishing, you're probably going to have fishing tackle and things like that, and fishing poles. But imagine, if you will, like a Jose type situation where he was lost at sea for over 400 days. That's a very long time, and salt water is very rough on your gear. So having something like the Yoyito or any kind of handline fishing thing that has no moving parts, it's going to work, it's there for emergencies or even just for fun, is a great option. I can keep this as long as I don't drop it in the water for 500 days, and I know it's going to work. And interestingly enough, a lot of stories you read about people who have been lost at sea, that becomes structure. A lot of animals congregate there, so you'd be surprised how just a simple handline rig could feed you. Something important to think about. With that same concept in mind, I might want to have some sort of way I could spearfish, basically, and a mask so I can see. There are lots of different things on the market. I've improvised a pole spear to just kind of show you can improvise things, and it might be something you have on board, like your net that got ripped up or something, and you use the handle of it to kind of fashion something like this, where you know, that shark that's been bothering me at my boat, or that sea turtle that's been following me for the last couple miles, like he's gonna get eaten. They sell commercial products that are travel pole spears that, you know, again, you could maybe, if you have a center console boat, it's just under there in case you need it kind of thing. But the whole premise of a pole spear is they typically come with rubber, and we hold it and launch it, and it gives it speed, and you'd be surprised how close you can get to some big fish and be able to take them. So now that we're kind of thinking about food, a common man tactic for me would be like some sort of solar oven. Now, I have a few that I really like, but you could easily improvise one out of, you know, a car window shield thing that blocks the sun, anything reflective, but they're kind of floppy. One of my personal favorites is called the Copenhagen solar oven. Now, why am I even bringing this up? Okay, so we're stuck on a boat out at sea. We don't have wood to burn, but we do have the sun. And we can actually cook in this thing. So I'm not just thinking about fish. Yeah, sushi out on the water sounds great, but you know, those sea turtles and things like that we might be catching, if I want to cook it and make sure I'm safe, I can with something like a solar oven. I can also use it to process water, and it requires no fuel other than sunshine. Now obviously it's not always going to be sunny, but when it is, you can use it. And so something like that is very smart to think about to have. Now the Copenhagen, it's fairly large, but it breaks down, and it's again something you could maybe have just sitting in your center console in case you needed it, or you can at least have like a car shade that you can improvise if God forbid you ever had to out on the water. Part of the reason I think about that too, a lot of times people stuck out at sea end up consuming seabirds and things like that too. And that's definitely something that I'm going to want to cook. And I can with something like a solar oven. Now, when it comes to solar ovens, it's not just, you know, that simple. It can be, but if you have a black pot, which is also a container that we can catch water in if it's raining and things like that, so we have fresh water. We can also heat up vessels of salt water and basically improvise a solar still. There are commercial solar stills on the market. They're fairly pricey, but if you don't have the means for that, you can still have things to be able to improvise something, and it's not going to be, you know, you're getting a gallon of water a day type thing, but it's going to be enough to wet your whistle, and in trying times, that is a big morale boost. So this is an aluminum pot that I use with my solar cooker, and you know, this would be something you would want to have on board. It's, like I said, we can catch water with it if it's raining as well, and there's efficient ways to do that as well. Typically when I'm using my solar cooker, I'll put my food in the pot. I'll put this in this bag. Now we can also use a bag like this to improvise a solar still, so let me show you kind of what that looks like real quick. So when it comes to improvising a solar still, it's pretty easy, but we need, you know, some kind of container. Now I've seen people like do this with duct tape or whatever, but you know, here's something. You know, I stopped for a drink at the gas station before I went out fishing, kind of thing. Just a, you know, a standard cup, and I like this one because it's kind of tall. But this would be my dirty seawater that we're trying to turn into fresh water. My bag from my solar oven, and a vessel in the center basically to catch the condensation. It's a matter of getting this right here. We want this to have a little bit of sag to it, so I'm going to use some cord that I have right here to basically make this nice and vapor tight. We got that nice and tied off. We got our catch cup in the middle. We got our dirty water in the pot, and we just need some sort of weight. And in this, I'm just using a fishing weight, something we might have on board, and that's going to go right in the center. And essentially, all the seawater that evaporates is going to collect on this plastic surface, and because we got the weight in the middle, it's going to be funneled into the vessel. And so that's just something to keep in mind. I would want to have information like that if I was stuck on a boat somewhere. Is it going to work as efficiently and as well as a commercial product? No, but common man tactic, you can, you know, maybe even do this out of a bait bucket and just some plastic, and you might even come across some plastic on the water. There's tons of it out there floating in the ocean, and so that's all resources in my book. But now, say I take this and I do have a solar oven, I'm going to speed up the process and get even hotter temps and be able to produce more water. You know, something like that is going to work even more efficiently. Another interesting side note with something like this is we have gigantic signal mirrors. A lot of water search and rescue operations are, you know, fueled by air support, and we want to be easy to find. So another common man thing that I would have, like kind of in my sea survival kit, is for certain a signal mirror. They can reach out really far, and you can kind of try to get those pilots' attention. Because just because you see them doesn't mean they see you. So just to recap on some of the things we talked about, you know, a space blanket is awesome to have in a situation like this. Some kind of way to get food without a fishing pole, you know, whether that's a pole spear or a hand line. We talked about improvising a solar still for water, catching water. You know, the more containers the merrier in this kind of a situation, because when it does rain, that's automatic drinking water right there. And you know, something as simple as goggles to, you know, help you see and unfoul a fouled up prop or something like that will pay dividends. And even for, you know, spearing some fish. A lot of fish congregate near that boat. That's a form of structure to them, and they'll follow you along, and you never know what you can get. It might be a, you know, cobia coming up to ride along with you, and that is some good eating. We talked about, you know, a solar oven, which a lot of people might not consider in a situation like this, but as far as a common man option, that would be something I'd want to have. And even if I didn't have one and I had my space blanket, we could improvise something like that. And we can also use this for fishing. Lots of little tips there. Hopefully you never have to use any of them, but if you did end up in that situation, just having it in your brain now, it's a tool to improvise and overcome and adapt. And hopefully, at the end of the day, you know, it just makes you take some of that technology more seriously. It's kind of crazy that more than 85% of the people out there, according to the Coast Guard, are not using this technology appropriately. And hopefully, you know, this video changes that even for just one person. So look into it, do your research, understand how to use it, and understand how to make yourself easier to find for the fantastic infrastructure that we do have in place here in America. Those rescue units are out there every day dealing with people that thought never in a million years would this ever happen to them. So let's make it easier for them, guys, and put a little time and effort into it. And hopefully you never have to use it, but if you did, you know what you're doing. Again, this wasn't meant to be an exhaustive, you know, kind of skills list, just some outside the box thinking, some common man stuff that you might want to carry with you if you do spend time, you know, fishing, especially offshore, where you're at a lot more risk for, you know, becoming stranded. The biggest thing you can do is understand that technology and make sure you have a way to reach back for help if you do end up in a real situation, and it can happen in the blink of an eye, just like that. Even just having something as simple as goggles, you know, you hit a crab trap that's floating out there or something, and the wires are wrapped around your prop, you can see what's going on and hold your breath and try to get out there. So these little things go a long way, and a lot of people don't think that, you know, the worst is going to happen, but especially if you spend time offshores, you know, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And miracles do happen. These guys could still be out there on their boat. We don't know. It's unfortunate that the search has been called off, but, you know, fingers crossed for a miracle. Guys have done it for longer, you know, 490 something days, I think, something like that, something close to that. Outrageously crazy amount of time to be stuck floating on the ocean on a boat. But it's been done before, and if that doesn't give you a glimmer of hope, I don't know what else would. But obviously it's a very tough situation, and my heart goes out to the families affected. And hopefully some good comes out of this, and maybe, you know, somebody out there watching this pays a little bit of heed to it, and it helps you